Right on the sidewalk, a little girl kneels beside her spilled meal, clutching a few wrinkled bills, tears streaking down her face. Beside her lies a small teddy bear, and a stray German shepherd, ribs showing, eyes full of loyalty and hunger. From the diner door, the restaurant owner, still in his red apron, stares, torn between pity and pride. And just a few feet away, a police officer stops in his tracks. He's tired, uniform dusted with rain, but when he sees the girl and the dog, something inside him changes. What he does next will leave the whole street silent. What would you do if you were him? Walk away? Or stop and change two lives forever? Tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about compassion, courage, and second chances. May your day be blessed with warmth, love, and a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can become someone's miracle. The town of Cedar Hollow rested beneath a sky the color of a cold iron. It was late December, and winter had sunk its teeth deep into the land. Snow lay like a heavy quilt over rooftops and streets, muffling every sound except the occasional creak of old wood or the distant bark of a dog. The wind that swept through the narrow lanes carried the smell of chimney smoke and loneliness. At the edge of town stood a weathered wooden house, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. Inside, a small fire burned in the stove, fighting a losing battle against the cold. Hazel Monroe, an 8-year-old girl with soft blonde curls and pale, freckled skin, sat cross-legged on the floor, hugging her knees for warmth. Her eyes were a gray blue, the color of a winter morning, and though her clothes were worn and her hands chapped, there was a quiet strength in her posture. She had learned early that crying did not make the world kinder. Her mother, Laura Monroe, stood at the counter stirring a pot of soup that smelled faintly of chicken bones and onions. She was 35, tall but frail, with brown hair tied into a messy knot, and lines of fatigue tracing her face. Once, before the years of factory work, she had been beautiful in a way that drew people's eyes. Now her beauty was something softer, quieter, the kind that lived in small acts of care. Her factory uniform hung on a nail near the door, the fabric stiff with wear. Laura's hands, red and calloused, moved gently as she stirred the pot. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart," she said, forcing cheer into her voice. Hazel looked up from her spot near the stove. "The same soup?" she asked softly. Laura smiled, though her eyes didn't follow. "The same soup," she said, "but tonight I added more water. Makes it last longer." Hazel giggled faintly. "Then it's soup for 2 nights." Laura nodded. The laughter, small and fleeting, filled the cabin like light through cracked glass. They sat at the tiny wooden table, 2 chipped bowls between them. Hazel blew on her spoon, the steam clouding her face. "Mom," she said suddenly, "when you get your raise next month, can we buy that thick blanket from the store window?" Laura hesitated, her spoon pausing midway. "We'll see, love. Maybe by then, spring will come early." Hazel smiled, content to believe her. Outside, snowflakes drifted down lazily against the window pane, glinting like tiny shards of glass. From the far end of the street, the whistle of a train echoed, the night freight to Cleveland, reminding Laura that time moved on even when one's life stood still. The walls of their little home trembled slightly when the wind rose again. Laura pulled her sweater tight and glanced toward the old clock above the mantel. 10:30. In 6 hours, she'd need to be at the garment factory again. "Go to bed soon," she said softly. "Tomorrow's Saturday, but you'll need your strength." Hazel tilted her head. "Can I help fold clothes again?" Laura chuckled. "You fold them better than most people at the factory." That night, after Hazel was asleep, Laura sat by the window, mending a tear in her coat under the dim light of a single bulb. The needle trembled slightly in her cold fingers. From outside came the distant hum of a patrol car driving down the main street. The sound of safety to some, the sound of distance to others. Across town, in a modest brick house not far from the riverbank, Officer Nathan Cole finished his paperwork by the dim yellow light of a desk lamp. He was 35, broad-shouldered with a sturdy frame, the kind of man whose presence filled a room even when he said nothing. His face bore the quiet weariness of someone who had seen too much too soon. Deep-set brown eyes, a faint scar above his right brow from his time in the city force before transferring to Cedar Hollow. His dark hair was peppered with early gray, not from age but from nights without rest. Nathan lived alone except for his partner, a 7-year-old German shepherd named Rex. Rex had once served beside him in the K9 unit, sharp, disciplined, and endlessly loyal. His coat was a blend of sable and ash gray, his eyes intelligent and alert. Since Nathan's wife Sarah had died 2 winters ago in a car accident, Rex had become his anchor, the only living being that made the silence of the house bearable. Sarah had been a nurse, kind, gentle, with auburn hair and a habit of humming old hymns under her breath. Her death had hollowed Nathan out. Since then, he had thrown himself into his work, patrolling every street, helping every stranger, as if by saving others he might one day forgive himself for not saving her. Now, as the clock struck midnight, Nathan reached for Rex's leash. "Let's check the east block before we turn in," he muttered. Rex wagged his tail once, ready. Outside, the wind sliced through the empty streets, carrying fine snow that shimmered beneath the lamplight. The two of them walked in rhythm, man and dog, partners bound by duty and loss. Nathan's boots crunched over the frozen ground. Rex's breath puffed white in the air. At the corner of Maple Street, the faint orange glow of the garment factory could be seen in the distance. The night shift was still running. Silhouettes moved behind the frosted windows. Nathan often stopped there on his patrols, checking the security lights, exchanging a wave with the guard. But tonight, the air smelled of oil and something else, metal, sharp, and strange. Then came the sound, a single muffled thud, followed by a low groan that rolled through the snow. Nathan froze. "Rex, heel!" They ran toward the factory. Through the chain-link fence, Nathan saw it. A collapsed section of the roof, beams jutting through the smoke, the faint red flicker of emergency lights from within. He shouted into his radio, calling for backup, and pushed through the gate. Rex barked sharply, circling the debris. Inside, the smell of dust and burning fabric stung his lungs. Workers scrambled out, coughing. "Someone's trapped!" a voice cried. Nathan spotted a piece of yellow fabric beneath a fallen beam, a woman's sleeve. He and Rex lunged forward, gripping, pulling, ignoring the sting of splinters. "Hold on!" Nathan shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. Together, man and dog freed the trapped woman, dragging her out into the snow. But when Nathan knelt down, he realized she was still, too still. Her name tag read Laura Monroe. For a long moment, he stayed there, snow melting on his gloves, breath heavy. The sirens wailed closer, their red lights spinning across his face. Rex whined softly, nudging Nathan's shoulder, as if to remind him that the living still needed him. Hours later, Nathan stood outside the Monroe house, his patrol car idling at the curb. Through the frosted window, a small figure could be seen, Hazel, sleeping beside the stove, wrapped in a quilt too thin for the night's cold. Nathan held Laura's folded uniform in his hands, sealed in a plastic evidence bag. The moonlight glinted off the blue fabric, the same color as Hazel's eyes. He hesitated before knocking. How do you tell a child her mother isn't coming home? The thought struck him like a stone to the chest. He looked down at Rex, who gazed up at him with quiet understanding. "Not tonight," Nathan whispered. "Let her sleep." He left the evidence bag at the doorstep, tucked beneath the old welcome mat. Then he stood there for a while, watching the smoke curl from the chimney, before turning away into the snow. Behind him, inside the little wooden house, Hazel stirred from her dreams. The fire had dimmed, and the night had grown colder. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, a deep, steady sound. She opened her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Mom?" Only the wind answered. Morning crept slowly into Cedar Hollow, thin and gray, as if even the sun hesitated to rise over the sorrow of the night before. A brittle frost clung to every branch, turning the street outside Hazel's house into a corridor of glass. Inside, the fire in the stove had long died, leaving only faint curls of smoke and the smell of ash. Hazel woke shivering. For a moment, she didn't understand why the room was so quiet. Usually her mother would be humming, a small, tuneless sound while folding laundry or boiling water. But now there was only the steady ticking of the clock and the distant cry of crows over the rooftops. The front door creaked. Hazel ran to it, half hoping, half afraid. When she opened it, a thin drift of snow blew in. There was no one there, only her mother's folded uniform in a plastic bag resting on the doorstep, a piece of blue fabric glimmering like something unreal. She picked it up with trembling fingers, confused by its coldness. On the collar, a faint tag still bore her mother's name, Laura Monroe. At first, Hazel didn't cry. She didn't understand enough to cry. She simply sat on the floor, holding the bag close to her chest, whispering her mother's name again and again, as if that could bring her back. The day passed in a blur. By afternoon, people began arriving, neighbors she barely knew. Mrs. Green from next door, a stout woman in her 50s with a floral scarf and a face carved by worry, brought a casserole. "Poor child," she murmured, brushing Hazel's hair gently. Her voice was kind but distant, the way people speak when they don't know what to say. Behind her came Mr. Green, tall and stooped, with gray hair and hands that smelled of tobacco. He cleared his throat awkwardly and left an envelope of cash on the table before stepping back into the cold. Hazel didn't eat. She sat by the window, staring out at the falling snow. Every shape, every sound, every knock on the door felt unreal, like a dream she might wake from if she just waited long enough. That night, the little wooden house seemed larger than it ever had. The chairs stood empty, the table still set for two. Hazel lit a candle, the flame small and unsteady, and placed it beside her mother's photo. The flickering light caught on the edges of the frame, dancing like ghosts. She pressed her palms together and whispered, "I'll be good, Mom, I promise." Outside, on the street corner, Officer Nathan Cole stood in his patrol coat, watching the house from a distance. The storm had passed, but the snow was deep, and his breath came out in pale clouds. Rex, his German shepherd, sat at his side, his thick fur dusted with frost. Nathan's mind replayed the image of Laura Monroe's still face under the rubble. He couldn't stop seeing it. And now, looking at the faint candlelight through the window, he imagined the child inside, alone, holding on to something that wasn't enough to keep her warm. He had seen too many tragedies in his career, but this one refused to leave him. It felt personal, as though the town's silence itself accused him of not arriving sooner. He reached down to pat Rex's head. "We did what we could," he murmured. Rex tilted his head, his amber eyes reflecting the candlelight. The dog gave a quiet whine, the kind that carried more understanding than words. Later that evening, Nathan drove home. The heater in the patrol car struggled against the cold, and his gloved hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles ached. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he didn't go inside immediately. Instead, he sat in the car for a long time, watching the wind blow through the frozen trees. Inside the house, everything was exactly as he had left it, neat, silent, lifeless. On the mantel sat a photo of Sarah, his late wife. Her auburn hair framed a smile that seemed to belong to another life. She had been the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make it warmer simply by existing. Her kindness was effortless, her laughter quiet but contagious. Losing her had not broken him all at once. It had hollowed him slowly, day by day, until all that remained was duty. Now, duty had led him to Hazel. He poured himself a cup of coffee that went untouched and turned on the small radio in the corner. The local announcer's voice drifted through the static. Cedar Hollow mourns the loss of factory worker Laura Monroe after last night's structural collapse. Nathan shut it off. The silence that followed was louder than any noise. Meanwhile, at the Monroe house, the neighbors had left. The food on the table had gone cold. Hazel sat in her mother's armchair, legs tucked beneath her, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and lavender. She tried to hum the tune her mother used to sing, but her voice cracked midway. The candle had burned down to a stub. As the evening deepened, a new sound echoed outside, a low growl followed by scratching at the door. Hazel froze, then slowly opened it. A stray cat, thin, gray, with one torn ear, slipped inside, shaking snow from its fur. It stared at her for a moment before curling up beside the stove. Hazel smiled faintly. "You can stay," she whispered, "but only if you promise not to leave like everyone else." The cat purred, a sound so soft it nearly blended with the ticking clock. The next few days blurred together. Hazel tried to live as if her mother were still there. She folded laundry, boiled water, and left a second cup at the table. But the cold was merciless. The food ran out, and the last log in the stove turned to ash. She ventured out once to the small grocery down the street, clutching the few coins she had found in a jar. The owner, Mr. Finley, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a kindly face weathered by years behind the counter, recognized her immediately. "Hazel, child, where's your mother?" he asked. Hazel hesitated. "She's away." Finley's expression softened with pity. He handed her a small loaf of bread and 2 apples. "Tell her she can pay next week." Hazel nodded, clutching the food to her chest as if it were treasure. Back at home, she shared the bread with the stray cat, who had now become her silent companion. She named him Ash, for the soot that dusted his fur. At night, she held him close for warmth. On the 4th night, heavy footsteps echoed on the porch. Hazel sat up, heart pounding. A firm knock followed. She crept to the door, peering through the cracked curtain. It was Officer Cole. Snowflakes glistened on his coat, his breath visible in the air. Beside him, Rex waited, his ears perked. Nathan spoke gently through the door. "Hazel, it's Officer Cole. I need to talk to you." Hazel hesitated, then opened the door halfway. The cat darted behind her. The warmth of the small house hit Nathan's face like a memory. He took off his cap and knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "I brought you something," he said softly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small parcel, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a scarf, hand-knitted and faded but clean. "It's cold out here. You should wear this." Hazel looked at the scarf, then at his face. There was no pity in his eyes, only something quieter, understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. Rex took a cautious step forward, sniffing the air. Hazel reached out a small hand. The dog's nose brushed her fingers, warm and soft. He wagged his tail once, gently. It was the first time Hazel had smiled since the accident. Nathan stood, his breath fogging in the cold. "If you need anything, I live down by the river. You can knock on my door any time, day or night." She nodded, clutching the scarf. "Will you and Rex come back tomorrow?" Nathan hesitated. "If you'd like." "Then I'd like that," Hazel said simply. When he turned to leave, the little girl stood framed in the doorway, the scarf around her neck, the candlelight behind her flickering like hope refusing to die. Rex looked back once before following his master into the snow. That night, Hazel placed the new scarf over her mother's photo, whispering, "A kind man came today. He had a dog who smiled." Outside, Nathan paused at the end of the street. He looked up at the window glowing faintly against the dark. Something in him, something long dormant, stirred. He realized that perhaps duty wasn't only about protecting strangers. Sometimes it was about staying long enough to keep someone from disappearing into the cold. The snow in Cedar Hollow had begun to turn gray at the edges, packed down by passing boots and horse carts. Winter had lost its beauty and become a weight, a reminder of how long hunger could last. The Monroe house stood quiet on the corner of Birch Lane, its windows dim, chimney cold. Inside, Hazel sat by the table, tracing circles in the frost on the glass, her small fingers pale and trembling. The scarf that Officer Nathan Cole had given her hung loosely around her neck, its coarse wool smelling faintly of pine and something safe. For 3 days Nathan hadn't returned. He wanted to. He thought about it every evening. But something in him hesitated, afraid that his pity would overstep into her grief. Still, Hazel waited. Every time she heard footsteps on the snow, she glanced at the door, half hoping for the bark of the German shepherd that had wagged its tail at her so gently. But the street remained empty. By noon, the cupboard was bare. The last slice of bread had been shared with the cat, Ash, who now sat curled on a pile of rags near the stove, blinking his yellow-green eyes in drowsy indifference. His gray fur had filled out since she found him, and he had a small white patch over his chest, shaped like a heart. Hazel smiled faintly at him. "You're getting fat, Ash. You eat better than me." The cat yawned as if to agree. Hazel put on her old coat, its sleeves too short, and stepped out into the cold. The wind bit at her cheeks, turning them pink. The scarf was her only real warmth, and she tucked it close beneath her chin. The town center was a mile away, a place of clinking shop bells, steaming windows, and voices muffled by scarves. She walked slowly, head down, clutching an empty canvas bag. At the end of Main Street stood Finley's General Store, its window fogged from the heat inside. Mr. Finley, the elderly shopkeeper, with a kind face and white hair combed neatly back, was stacking jars behind the counter when Hazel entered. He looked up, smiling. "Ah, there you are again, Hazel. How's that scarf treating you?" Hazel gave a shy nod. "It's warm, thank you." He noticed the shadows under her eyes, the stiffness in her movements. "You look tired. Are you getting enough to eat?" Hazel hesitated, then placed a few coins on the counter. "I need something cheap. Bread, maybe." Finley looked at the coins, barely enough for a small roll. He sighed softly. "Tell you what, child, there's some fruit that's gone soft in the back. You can take it if you don't mind the bruises." Her face lit up. "I don't mind." While she picked through the apples, another voice broke the quiet, brisk, confident, and slightly amused. "Still giving handouts, Mr. Finley?" A man had entered the shop, shaking snow from his dark coat. He was tall, lean, perhaps in his early 40s, with slicked back hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His name was Martin Graves, a property agent who owned several of the old buildings around town, including Hazel's former home. He dressed well, leather gloves, tailored coat, and carried himself like a man who believed kindness was a form of weakness. Finley's face hardened. "It's called helping, Martin. You might try it sometime." Graves smirked, glancing at Hazel. "Helping or spoiling? Kids these days think pity's a profession. You feed one and 10 will line up tomorrow." Hazel shrank back, clutching her bag. Finley's voice sharpened. "That child lost her mother last week. Show some decency." But Martin only shrugged, dropping a few coins on the counter. "The world doesn't owe her a meal. The sooner she learns that, the better." He took his change and left, his boots leaving sharp prints in the snow. Finley shook his head, muttering, "That man's got money but no soul." He turned back to Hazel. "Ignore him, child. You keep that fruit and bread, all right? You owe me nothing." Hazel nodded quickly, blinking away the sting in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Finley." Outside, the wind had grown stronger. Hazel carried her small bag against her chest, walking past the row of shuttered stores. The smell of broth drifted from a nearby diner, Maple Diner, with its glowing red sign and fogged-up windows. Inside, people laughed, spoons clinking against bowls. Her stomach twisted painfully at the scent. She stood at the window for a long time, watching steam rise from the soup pots. The warmth behind the glass seemed like another world. A waitress noticed her and frowned, gesturing for her to move along. Hazel turned away quickly, tears pricking at her eyes. She kept walking until she reached the alley behind the diner, where bins overflowed with discarded cardboard and frozen scraps of bread. There, a boy about her age was rummaging through a crate. He was thin, with sandy hair and a patched coat, his face smudged with soot. He looked up as she approached. "You looking for bottles, too?" Hazel shook her head. "No, I just wanted to see if they threw anything good away." The boy grinned, revealing a missing tooth. "Name's Eddie, by the way. Been out here 2 winters now. You get used to it." Hazel frowned. "Used to what?" "The cold, the looks, the hunger. People stop seeing you after a while." His tone was casual, but his eyes were too old for his face. They searched together for a while, finding a few empty cans and a dented tin cup. Eddie stuffed the cans into a sack. "If you take these to the recycling shed near the bus stop, they'll give you a few coins, enough for soup if you're lucky." Hazel's heart lifted. "Really?" Eddie nodded. "Just don't let the older guys see you. They guard that spot like wolves." When they finished, Eddie gave her half of what he'd found. "You look like you could use this more than me." Hazel wanted to refuse, but his grin made her smile. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Eddie said. "Come back tomorrow. We'll hunt for more." He waved before disappearing down the alley. Hazel walked to the recycling shed, the wind tugging at her coat. The clerk inside was a stooped man with a cigarette dangling from his lip. He weighed her small bag and dropped 3 worn bills into her hand. $3, he said flatly. $3. Her pulse quickened. Enough for a bowl of noodles. A real one. She pressed the money to her chest and hurried back toward Maple Diner, her breath clouding the air. The neon sign flickered like a beacon as she approached. Inside, the same waitress stood behind the counter, wiping a glass. Hazel pushed open the door, her heart pounding. "Please," she said softly, "I'd like a bowl of noodles." The waitress barely looked at her. $3. Hazel unfolded the bills with trembling fingers. "Here." The woman sighed, took the money, and shouted the order to the kitchen. Hazel sat near the window, her feet dangling above the floor. The smell of garlic and broth filled the air, and for the first time in days, she felt something like peace. When the bowl arrived, steaming and golden, Hazel whispered a thank you and ate slowly, savoring every bite. Each spoonful tasted like warmth and memory. She imagined her mother across the table, smiling softly, saying, "See, I told you soup fixes everything." As she finished, a soft bark sounded from outside. Hazel looked up, startled. Through the window, Rex, the German shepherd, stood by the lamppost, his fur dusted with snow. His amber eyes found her through the glass. Moments later, the door opened, and Officer Cole stepped in, brushing snow from his coat. He saw her immediately. "Hazel?" She froze, spoon halfway to her lips. I was hungry." Nathan smiled gently. "That's a good reason." He walked to her table, removing his hat. "I was looking for you. Mr. Finley said you'd come this way." Hazel looked down, embarrassed. "I found bottles. They gave me money." Nathan's smile deepened, touched with pride. "You're resourceful. That's good. But next time, let me know. You shouldn't be out in this cold alone." Rex padded closer, tail wagging slowly. Hazel reached out and stroked his fur. It was warm, softer than she remembered. Nathan ordered coffee and sat across from her, his eyes thoughtful. "Tell me something, Hazel. What do you want to do tomorrow?" Hazel thought for a moment. "Maybe find more bottles and buy another bowl of noodles." Nathan chuckled quietly. "I think we can find a better plan than that." When they stepped outside together, the snow had started falling again, heavier now. Rex pressed against Hazel's leg, guiding her gently through the drifts. Nathan walked beside them, his gloved hands deep in his pockets. Above them, the diner sign flickered red, casting a faint glow on the snow. Hazel looked up at him and said, "Officer Cole, will you come back tomorrow?" He nodded. "Yes, Hazel, I'll come back." It was the first promise either of them had made in a long time, and both meant it. The morning after the snowfall was a rare kind of quiet in Cedar Hollow, the sort of quiet that came not from peace, but from exhaustion. Every roof was blanketed in white, and the street lamps still burned even after dawn, their light blurred by the fog of the cold air. Hazel Monroe walked beside Officer Nathan Cole, her small boots sinking into the soft snow with each step. Beside them, Rex, the German shepherd, moved gracefully, his thick coat shining like brushed steel in the pale light. The dog's ears flicked occasionally, as if listening to the whisper of the snowflakes. Hazel's breath came out in small clouds, and she pressed the scarf tighter around her neck. Nathan glanced down at her, noticing the faint tremor in her hands. "You warm enough?" he asked. She nodded quickly, though her lips were pale. "I'm fine." He stopped, taking off one of his leather gloves. "Here," he said, offering it. "You can keep your right hand inside your pocket." Hazel hesitated, then accepted it shyly. The glove hung loose on her small fingers. "Thank you, Officer Cole." "Just Nathan," he corrected gently. "Only bad guys call me Officer Cole." Hazel smiled faintly. It was a fragile thing, like the edge of sunlight breaking through clouds. They reached a small park near the river, benches half buried in snow, the frozen pond glinting under the morning light. Nathan led her to a wooden bench where the snow had been brushed off. He took a thermos from his coat and poured 2 cups of hot cocoa. "It's not fancy," he said, handing one to her, "but it helps on cold mornings." The steam rose between them. Hazel held the cup with both hands, inhaling the sweet scent before taking a careful sip. The warmth burned her tongue, but she didn't mind. For the first time in weeks, her stomach didn't hurt from emptiness. Rex lay beside the bench, eyes half closed, his muzzle dusted with snow. A child passing by with her mother stopped to stare. The little girl pointed at Rex. "He looks like a snow wolf." Nathan smiled politely at the woman, who nodded in recognition. "Officer Cole," she said warmly. "Good to see you again. That's a fine-looking dog." The woman's name was Lydia Parker, a nurse in her late 20s who often volunteered at the local clinic. She had chestnut brown hair tucked under a wool hat, and the kind of calm presence that made children stop crying just by looking at her. She turned her attention to Hazel and smiled. "And who's this young lady?" Hazel blinked shyly. "Hazel Monroe, ma'am." "Ah," Lydia said softly, her smile fading into something gentler. "I heard about your mother. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." She hesitated before glancing at Nathan. "If you ever need a warm meal or a checkup, Officer Cole knows where to find me." Hazel nodded, not knowing what else to say. Lydia gave her a small peppermint candy from her pocket before walking on. Nathan watched her leave, thoughtful. Lydia had always been the kind of person who tried to mend what the world broke. After they finished their cocoa, Nathan stood. "Come on," he said. "There's something I want to show you." They walked across the bridge that crossed the frozen creek, the sound of crunching snow underfoot. On the other side stood a red brick building with tall windows, the Cedar Hollow Police Department. Hazel stared up at it nervously. "Am I in trouble?" Nathan chuckled. "No, you're not in trouble, but I can't have you sleeping in that cold house anymore. You'll stay here for a while. We've got a spare cot in the break room." She hesitated at the door, clutching her scarf. "Won't people mind?" Nathan opened the door, letting out a gust of warm air. "They'll manage." Inside, the building was plain but cozy. The scent of coffee, the faint hum of the radiator, the walls lined with faded photographs of past officers. At a desk near the entrance sat Sergeant Duffy, a large man with a bristly mustache and a laugh like thunder. He was in his 50s, with a round face that looked perpetually annoyed, but rarely was. "Cole," he boomed, "you brought company?" His gaze softened when he saw Hazel peeking out from behind Nathan's coat. "Well, now, who's this little snowflake?" "This is Hazel," Nathan said. "She'll be staying here for a few days until we figure things out." Duffy nodded. "We've got plenty of blankets in the storage room. I'll have Stevens set up a cot." Officer Stevens, a thin young man with sharp features and perpetually messy hair, waved from behind a stack of files. "Got it, Sarge." Hazel's eyes wandered across the room, lingering on the bulletin board where photographs of missing people were pinned. One of them showed a smiling woman with 2 children. Someone had written "found safe" across it in red ink. Hazel stared at the word "safe" for a long time before Nathan gently guided her away. He led her to the break room, a small space with a worn couch, a coffee machine, and a corkboard filled with doodles and jokes. Rex immediately claimed the rug near the heater, curling into a perfect circle. Nathan handed Hazel a blanket. "You'll sleep here for now. It's not much, but it's warm." Hazel nodded and sat on the couch. "It's nice," she whispered. While she rested, Nathan went to his desk, trying to focus on reports, but his thoughts kept drifting. He looked at Rex, then at the little girl, now asleep beneath the blanket. Her small body barely made a rise under the fabric. Something about the sight brought back a memory. Sarah, his wife, reading bedtime stories in the lamplight, her voice soft, her hand resting gently on the back of his neck as she turned the pages. He stood abruptly, needing air. Duffy noticed and gave him a look that wasn't quite a question, but close enough. "You all right, Cole?" Nathan nodded. "Just taking Rex for a walk." Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world silent and still. He walked along the side street, Rex trotting beside him. The town looked peaceful from a distance, but Nathan knew how much pain hid beneath its roofs. Families struggling, dreams buried under debt and cold. He felt like a man trying to light a candle in a blizzard. When he returned, Hazel was awake, sitting on the couch with a pencil and a scrap of paper. She had drawn something, a rough sketch of Rex with his ears perked and tongue out. "He looks braver in real life," she said, embarrassed. Nathan smiled. "I don't know. You got his good side." Duffy passed by and peered over her shoulder. "That's not half bad, kiddo. Maybe we should hire you to draw suspects." Hazel giggled softly, and the sound made everyone in the room glance up and smile without quite knowing why. That evening, Lydia Parker stopped by the station, bringing a tray of hot food, stew and cornbread wrapped in cloth. "For your guest," she told Nathan. "Kids shouldn't live on cocoa and air." Hazel's eyes widened as she saw the meal. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Nathan and Lydia spoke quietly near the door. "She reminds you of someone, doesn't she?" Lydia asked. Nathan nodded. "She does." "Then maybe this is your second chance," Lydia said softly. "Not everything is meant to be lost." When night fell, Hazel lay beneath the blanket, Rex beside her, his tail occasionally brushing her arm. The station lights dimmed, and Nathan sat at his desk, finishing his report. Outside, snow began to fall again, silent, endless, pure. Before closing her eyes, Hazel whispered into the dark, "Good night, Mom." And though Nathan didn't hear the words, he looked up from his paper, sensing something shift in the air, as if a part of the house that had long been hollow had just filled with warmth. He leaned back, staring at the old ceiling tiles, and smiled faintly. "Sleep well, kid." The days that followed turned Cedar Hollow into a world of white silence. Snow piled high against the windows of the police station, muffling every sound. The streets outside were nearly deserted. Only the faint hum of a snowplow or the cry of distant crows broke the stillness. Inside, the station had become a strange kind of home, not just for Officer Nathan Cole and his loyal German shepherd Rex, but now for Hazel Monroe, the quiet little girl who seemed to breathe warmth into the gray walls. Each morning, Hazel helped Sergeant Duffy make coffee, standing on her toes to reach the counter. Duffy pretended to grumble about it. "You'll spill more beans than you grind, kid." But everyone could see the way his mustache twitched when he smiled behind his mug. Officer Stevens, the young and slightly awkward patrolman, had taken to bringing Hazel small puzzles and crayons whenever he came in from patrol. "Keeps her brain sharp," he'd say, though everyone knew he just wanted to see her grin. Hazel, for her part, had begun to bloom slowly, like a plant left too long in the dark finally finding light. She spoke more each day, though softly. She drew pictures of Rex, of snowflakes, of her mother. She placed each drawing in a neat pile beside her cot. Rex had become her shadow, following her from desk to desk, tail wagging, ears twitching whenever she laughed. Nathan noticed the change most of all. The house of grief that had lived inside him for years was beginning to thaw. Each time Hazel tugged his sleeve to show him something, a drawing, a puzzle, a question, he felt that thaw deepen, though he didn't yet know what to call it. One late afternoon, the storm outside intensified. Snow swirled like dust in the wind, and the power flickered twice before finally going out. Duffy cursed under his breath. "Generator's shot again. Stevens, check the basement." "I'm on it," Stevens shouted, already grabbing a flashlight. Hazel huddled under a blanket on the couch, watching the beams of light dance along the walls as the men moved around. Rex lay beside her, alert but calm. Nathan crouched down, making sure she was warm. "We'll get the lights back on soon," he said reassuringly. "I'm not scared," she replied, gripping the edge of the blanket. "The dark isn't bad if someone's there." Nathan smiled faintly. "You're braver than most officers I know." Before she could answer, the front door creaked open, letting in a rush of icy air. A woman stepped through, her cheeks flushed red from the cold. It was Lydia Parker, the nurse who had visited earlier in the week. Snow clung to her coat and to the loose strands of her chestnut hair that had escaped her hat. She carried a small bag of supplies and a flashlight. "The clinic lost power," she explained, brushing snow from her sleeves. "I thought I'd check if anyone here needed medicine or a warm meal." Duffy looked, relieved. "You're a saint, Parker. We've got stew in the back, but no heat till Stevens wrestles with that generator." Hazel peeked from behind the couch, her eyes lighting up. "Miss Lydia!" Lydia smiled warmly. "Hello, Hazel. Staying out of trouble?" "She's training to be a sergeant," Duffy joked from his desk. "Gives better orders than I do." They all laughed softly, the sound filling the darkened room. Lydia set her bag down and pulled out a small tin of cookies. "I brought these from the church. Thought you might like them." Hazel took one carefully, as though afraid it might vanish if she touched it too quickly. The cookie was buttery and sweet, and for a moment, she closed her eyes just to savor it. Meanwhile, downstairs, Stevens muttered curses at the stubborn generator. The old machine rattled, but refused to start. "Come on, you piece of junk," he groaned. Just as he was about to give up, Rex suddenly pricked his ears and barked. A sharp, urgent sound. Hazel's head snapped up. Nathan stood instantly. "Something's wrong." He and Duffy hurried toward the stairs, flashlights cutting through the dark. They found Stevens staring at the generator, now sputtering with smoke. "It's overheating," Stevens said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll need to vent it or it'll blow the fuse line." Nathan assessed the situation quickly. "We can't risk it catching fire. Shut it down." "But then we lose heat," Duffy reminded him. Lydia appeared behind them, flashlight steady. "We'll manage with blankets. A fire would be worse." So, the power stayed off. The building grew colder by the hour. By evening, the temperature had dropped enough that their breath misted in the air. Duffy handed out extra coats and blankets from the storage room. Hazel's hands were turning pink despite her layers. Nathan wrapped his scarf, the one Sarah had knitted years ago, around her shoulders without a word. Lydia watched him quietly. There was something in his face that wasn't just duty anymore, something gentler, deeper. When their eyes met, she smiled faintly and said, "You're good with her." Nathan shook his head. "She's the brave one." Later that night, after most of the officers had drifted off to sleep in their chairs, Nathan sat by the window with a cup of lukewarm coffee. The moonlight broke through the clouds, falling in silver patches on the snow outside. Rex sat beside him, head resting on his knee. Through the glass, Nathan could see the faint outline of Hazel asleep on the couch, her small hand tangled in the dog's fur. Lydia sat nearby, reading under the weak beam of her flashlight. The sight was so peaceful that it almost hurt. For the first time in years, Nathan felt the weight in his chest ease, not disappear, but shift, as though making room for something new. He found himself speaking softly, almost to himself. "Sarah would have liked her?" Lydia looked up. "Your wife?" Nathan nodded slowly. "She always wanted to adopt, said there were too many lonely hearts in the world. I told her we couldn't save everyone." He smiled sadly. "She told me we didn't have to. Just one was enough." Lydia closed her book and met his gaze. "Maybe this is your one." Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed outside, the sound of metal hitting the pavement. Rex leapt to his feet, barking sharply. Nathan grabbed his coat and flashlight. "Stay inside," he told Lydia. He and Rex stepped out into the snow. The wind had picked up, howling through the alleyways. Behind the station, a delivery truck had skidded off the road, one wheel stuck in a snowdrift. The driver, a young man no older than 20, stumbled out shivering. I lost control," he stammered. Nathan helped him steady himself. "You're lucky you didn't hit the power lines. Come inside, get warm." By the time they returned, Lydia already had blankets ready. Hazel rubbed her eyes, watching sleepily as the driver, Tommy, as he introduced himself, sat by the heater vent with trembling hands. He was thin, with a tired face and a scar on his chin. He worked night shifts delivering food supplies from the next town. "My boss'll kill me," he muttered. Duffy handed him coffee. "Your boss can wait till morning." As everyone settled again, Hazel looked around the dim room and whispered, "It feels like a family here." Nathan froze. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The word family had not entered his home, his heart, or his vocabulary in years. He cleared his throat. "Yeah," he said softly. "Something like that?" Lydia smiled knowingly. "Exactly like that." Hours later, long after midnight, the storm began to ease. The moon emerged, clean and bright, scattering silver across the snow. Inside the station, the faint hum of the repaired generator flickered back to life, sending a soft, golden light across Hazel's sleeping face. Nathan looked at her, at Rex, at the faint glow returning to the room, and thought, for the first time since Sarah's death, that maybe the world still had warmth left to give. The morning after the storm, Cedar Hollow woke under a thin, golden veil of light. The snow had finally stopped falling, and rooftops glittered like they'd been dusted with crushed glass. The air still carried the sharp bite of winter, but the sun stretched long fingers across the town, as if trying to apologize for what the night had taken. At the police station, the generator hummed faintly again, sending warmth through the radiators. The quiet hum of routine returned, phones ringing softly, the smell of coffee filling the halls, and the comforting sound of Rex's claws clicking on the tiled floor. Hazel Monroe, wrapped in Nathan's scarf, sat at the corner desk, drawing with a blunt pencil. Her cheeks had color again, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. Officer Nathan Cole watched her from across the room, pretending to fill out reports, but mostly just grateful for the sight. Sergeant Duffy was on the phone, arguing with someone from city maintenance about the plows. "You call this cleared roads? My grandmother could shovel faster with a teaspoon," he barked, slamming the receiver down before mumbling. "Unbelievable." Hazel giggled quietly, and Nathan raised an eyebrow. "You find that funny?" "A little," she said. "You all sound like family here." "Duffy's the grumpy uncle," Nathan replied. "Stevens is the clumsy cousin, and Rex—" He glanced down at the dog sitting loyally by Hazel's feet. "He's the sensible one." Rex tilted his head proudly, as though he understood. Hazel reached down to scratch behind his ears. "He saved me once already," she said softly. Nathan smiled but didn't answer. Something in her tone made him realize she still carried her mother's loss quietly, like a weight she refused to set down. A few hours later, the door opened and Postman Henry Briggs trudged in, stamping snow from his boots. Henry was in his 60s, a wiry man with a round face reddened by years of cold wind. He was cheerful by nature, known for knowing everyone's business and pretending not to gossip about it. "Morning, Cole," he greeted, pulling off his wool cap. "Got something strange here for you." Nathan looked up. "Strange how?" Henry pulled an envelope from his bag. It was old, the edges yellowed, the paper soft with time. Came through the mail sorting center with no return address, no postmark. Just your name and this station's address. Thought it was some mix-up. Nathan frowned, taking the envelope. His name was scrawled in a looping, uneven hand. He tore it open carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper, creased and faintly stained, written in delicate cursive. He read it silently. Hazel watched his brow furrow. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Nathan didn't answer right away. Finally, he said quietly, "It's from Sarah." Sergeant Duffy looked up sharply. "Your wife?" Nathan nodded slowly. "It's her handwriting, but it's dated 3 weeks before the accident." He unfolded it completely. The words were faded but legible. "If you're reading this, Nathan, it means I finally found the courage to leave this in your drawer. I know you worry too much, about me, about your work, about saving everyone. But sometimes saving one person is enough. If something ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep your heart open. There's so much good left in this world, even when it hurts to see it." Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he read the last line. "Find someone who needs you as much as you need to give." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. Hazel, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of the moment, reached out to touch his sleeve. "She sounds kind," she whispered. Nathan looked at her, eyes glassy. She was. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket. Maybe she still is somehow. After Henry left, Duffy patted Nathan's shoulder awkwardly. "Maybe it's a sign, Cole. You've done good by that kid." Nathan didn't answer, but the letter's words echoed in his mind. "Keep your heart open." That afternoon, Hazel helped Stevens clean the storage room, a task the young officer approached with theatrical misery. "If I don't come back in 10 minutes, tell my mother I fought bravely," he said, carrying a mop like a sword. Hazel laughed and began stacking boxes. At the bottom of one old crate, she found a small, worn leather collar, the kind used for a service dog. The name tag read, Scout. She ran her thumb over the engraving. "Who's Scout?" she asked. Stevens paused. "Scout was the old K-9 unit's dog, served with Nathan's partner before." He trailed off, realizing too late he'd said too much. "Before what?" Hazel asked quietly. Stevens sighed. "Before the explosion. The one that, well, that's how Officer Cole lost his partner. Scout didn't make it either." Hazel went silent for a moment, holding the collar close. Later, when Nathan walked past the storage room, she showed it to him. "This belonged to Scout, didn't it?" Nathan stopped in his tracks. For a long moment, he just stared at the collar. Then he nodded. "Yeah, he was Rex's brother. They trained together." His voice softened. "Scout saved my life once." Hazel looked up at him, eyes bright. Then maybe Rex was sent to save mine. The simplicity of her words caught him off guard. He smiled faintly, though something in his chest ached. That evening, Lydia Parker came by again with supplies for the station, warm blankets and soup from the clinic kitchen. She noticed the letter tucked in Nathan's notebook when he wasn't looking. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "A letter from Sarah. I thought I'd lost all her words." Lydia hesitated. "And did it help?" "Yes," he said. "And no. It makes me wish I'd listened to her sooner." Lydia placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Maybe you still can." As night fell, the wind returned, but softer now, like a sigh rather than a storm. Hazel sat near the heater, drawing again. This time, it wasn't a dog or snow. It was a woman standing under a tree, light shining through her hair. "It's your wife," she told Nathan shyly. "I don't remember her, but I thought she looked kind." Nathan took the drawing carefully. His throat tightened. She would have loved this. Rex wagged his tail beside Hazel, resting his head on her lap. Later that night, when the others had gone home, Nathan stood alone at the window, watching the snow drift under the lamplight. He thought about Sarah's letter, about the girl sleeping in the next room, and about how life had a strange way of circling back, of mending what it once broke. In his pocket, the paper rustled softly, like a whisper. He didn't need to read it again to know what it said. Find someone who needs you. He turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow from the heater, and walked toward the break room, where Hazel slept beside Rex. He paused at the door, watching them for a long time, the little girl breathing evenly, the dog's ears twitching as if still on guard. Nathan whispered into the dark, "I think I found her, Sarah." Outside, the wind lifted a few loose flakes from the ground, swirling them like sparks. Somewhere deep in the night, the world felt a little less cold. The following week brought a fragile calm to Cedar Hollow. The snow, once heavy and suffocating, now glistened under the pale winter sun, soft as powdered sugar. Children returned to playing on sidewalks, and shopkeepers began brushing snow off their windows again. Yet inside Officer Nathan Cole's mind, the letter from Sarah still lingered like a faint echo. It wasn't haunting, not anymore. It was a presence, quiet but alive, urging him to keep his heart open just as she'd written. At the station, life returned to its steady rhythm. Hazel Monroe had become something of a fixture there, small, polite, curious. She sat at Nathan's desk during the slow hours, coloring or helping Sergeant Duffy organize his endless mountain of paperwork. "You're better at this than Stevens," Duffy grumbled one morning, squinting at the neatly stacked files Hazel had arranged by color. "Maybe I should put you on payroll." Hazel giggled. "What's payroll?" "Something the town never has enough of," Duffy replied with a sigh, earning a laugh from everyone within earshot. Officer Stevens, meanwhile, had taken on the role of Hazel's unofficial older brother, teaching her how to fold paper airplanes and occasionally sneaking her candy from the vending machine. He was tall, lean, and perpetually rumpled, with hair that refused to stay combed and a tendency to speak too fast when nervous. Despite his clumsiness, his heart was too big for his uniform, and Nathan couldn't help but feel grateful for his presence. One crisp afternoon, Nathan decided Hazel needed a proper walk outside. The sun was pale but kind, and Rex was restless from too many hours indoors. Hazel bundled up in her oversized coat, a gift from Lydia, and together, the three set out toward the frozen creek at the edge of town. The air was full of the sound of melting icicles dripping rhythmically from rooftops. As they passed the row of shops on Main Street, Hazel stopped in front of a bakery window. Inside, a woman was arranging trays of pastries, golden croissants, sugar-glazed buns, steaming pies. The woman was in her early 40s, with auburn hair tied neatly in a bun, and a face both gentle and strong. She noticed Hazel's wide eyes and smiled through the glass before stepping outside. "Well, aren't you a little snowbird?" she said warmly. Her name was Martha Green, the owner of Maple Crust Bakery, known for her kindness as much as her cinnamon rolls. She had been widowed years earlier and had raised 2 sons who'd since left for college. Her eyes, a deep brown, held the calm of someone who had endured sorrow and learned to turn it into grace. Nathan nodded politely. "Morning, Martha." "Morning, officer," she said. Then to Hazel, You like pie? Hazel nodded eagerly. Martha chuckled, her cheeks dimpling. Good answer. Hold on. She disappeared into the shop and returned with a small box tied with red string. Apple pie. On the house. Hazel's eyes widened. Really? Really, Martha said. But you have to promise to share with your officer friend and that handsome dog. Rex barked once, as if agreeing to the terms. As they continued their walk, Hazel hummed softly, clutching the warm box. People here are nice, she said. Some of them, Nathan replied with a smile. You just found the good ones. When they reached the frozen creek, the world was quiet except for the faint trickle of water beneath the ice. Rex bounded ahead, his breath misting in the cold air. Hazel tossed him a stick, and he caught it mid-leap, tail wagging. Nathan watched them, the corners of his mouth lifting. But peace never lasted long in Cedar Hollow. As they turned back toward town, Rex suddenly froze, ears pricked, muscles tense. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Nathan followed his gaze. Across the field, half buried in snow, stood a man, disheveled, shivering, his coat torn. He looked to be in his late 40s, unshaven, with hollow cheeks and eyes that darted nervously. His clothes were city-worn, not suited for this kind of cold. Nathan stepped forward carefully, signaling Rex to stay close. Sir, you all right? The man hesitated, his breath visible in sharp bursts. You're a cop? Yes, Officer Cole. You're hurt? The man shook his head quickly. No, I'm fine. His gaze flicked toward Hazel, then back to Nathan. Just needed somewhere warm, that's all. Hazel's fingers tightened around Nathan's coat. Who is he? She whispered. I don't know yet, Nathan murmured. The man's name, as it turned out, was Frank Delaney. He'd been walking for miles after his truck broke down on the interstate. At least, that was what he claimed. Back at the station, while Lydia tended to the frostbite on his hands, Nathan noticed how Frank avoided eye contact, how his answers always came a second too late. Lydia, ever observant, leaned toward Nathan as they stood by the door. He's hiding something. Nathan nodded. I know. Hazel sat nearby, feeding Rex bits of pie. Is he bad? She asked quietly. Not sure yet, Nathan replied. But we'll find out. When the routine background check came back, it revealed nothing. No criminal record, no address matching his story. Frank claimed he'd been laid off from a factory in Cleveland and was heading south to find work. Still, something about his eyes unsettled Nathan, the way they flicked toward every exit in the room. That night, after most officers went home, Nathan stayed late reviewing files. Hazel had fallen asleep on the couch, Rex curled protectively beside her. The soft crackle of the heater filled the silence. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from the back door, metal scraping softly against metal. Nathan's instincts flared. He reached for his flashlight and moved quietly toward the sound. When he opened the door, he found Frank crouched near the locker area, rifling through a file box. What are you doing? Nathan's voice cut through the quiet like ice. Frank froze, his shoulders rigid. It's not what it looks like. Then tell me what it is. I needed a place to sleep, Frank stammered, standing slowly. But Nathan could see the folder clutched in his hand. One labeled Factory Explosion. Incident Report. His blood ran cold. How do you know about that file? Nathan demanded. Frank's face twisted, guilt flashing in his eyes. Because I was there, he said hoarsely. Your partner, the one who died that night. I was the supervisor on shift. Nathan stared at him, the words striking like a blow. You? Frank nodded, his hands trembling. It wasn't supposed to happen. I tried to stop it, but the safety line failed. I thought everyone died. I ran. I've been running ever since. Rex growled low, sensing the tension. Hazel, awakened by the voices, peeked from the hallway, eyes wide. Nathan? Nathan didn't look at her. His jaw tightened. You left him there. You left us there. Frank lowered his head. I've been trying to make it right ever since. I thought maybe, if I found you, I could explain. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Nathan's knuckles were white, the file trembling in his grip. Years of guilt, of unanswered questions came flooding back. And yet, as he looked at the trembling man before him, He felt not rage, but exhaustion. He exhaled slowly. "Sit down. You're not running anymore." Lydia stepped forward from the hallway, her face pale but steady. "He needs medical care and a statement. Then we'll call the department in Cleveland." Hazel watched, confused but sensing the weight of what had happened. Later, when Frank was escorted to the holding room, she approached Nathan quietly. "You forgave him?" Nathan looked down at her. "Not yet," he said. "But maybe that's what Sarah meant. Keeping your heart open doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means not letting it rule you." Rex nudged Hazel's hand, as if agreeing. She smiled faintly. "I think she'd be proud of you." Nathan didn't answer, but his eyes softened. Outside, the snow began again. Light, slow, peaceful this time. Falling not as a storm, but as a curtain drawing gently between the past and what was still to come. The morning after Frank Delaney's arrest, the air in Cedar Hollow felt heavier than the snow clouds gathering above it. A hush lingered in the police station. Not the usual calm of paperwork and coffee, but the dense, uncertain silence that comes after ghosts have been stirred. Officer Nathan Cole sat at his desk. The file from the factory explosion spread open before him. The papers, yellowed and smudged, smelled faintly of dust and burnt ink. Across the room, Frank sat behind the glass of the holding cell, his head bowed, his face gaunt in the morning light. Rex lay near Nathan's feet, his muzzle resting on his paws. Every so often, his ears flicked toward the sound of movement, the shuffle of boots, the faint creak of a chair, as if keeping watch over his human's thoughts. Hazel Monroe sat quietly at the break-room table, coloring a page from one of Officer Stevens's crossword books, her brow furrowed in childlike concentration. The world of grown-ups around her was heavy and strange, full of things she could sense but not yet name. "Coffee?" Lydia Parker's voice broke the silence as she entered the room, her hair tied up under a knitted cap, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried a tray of mugs, the aroma of strong brew cutting through the tension. Nathan took one and nodded gratefully. "You didn't have to come this early." Lydia gave a soft shrug. "Couldn't sleep. Some stories don't leave you when the day ends." Her gaze drifted toward the cell where Frank sat. "You going to question him again?" "I have to," Nathan said. "Internal Affairs wants a full statement before they transfer him to Cleveland." Lydia hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Be careful, Nathan. Men who live with guilt for that long, they can break in unexpected ways." Nathan met her eyes, appreciating the quiet concern there. "I've been broken before," he said simply. A light knock interrupted them. Sergeant Duffy entered, carrying a folder, thick with reports. "IA's sending a car by noon," he said. "They'll want your final interview recorded." His mustache bristled as he glanced toward Frank. "You sure you want to handle this yourself?" Nathan nodded. "It started with me. It ends with me." Hazel looked up from her coloring book. "Are they taking him away?" "Yes, kiddo," Duffy said, softening his tone. "He's going to face what he did." Hazel's small hands fidgeted. "But he said he didn't mean to hurt anyone." Nathan glanced at her, struck by the sincerity in her voice. "Accidents can still have consequences, Hazel. Saying sorry doesn't make the past disappear." She thought about that for a long moment before whispering, "But maybe it helps it hurt less." Nathan didn't reply. The simplicity of her words hit him harder than he expected. Later that morning, Nathan entered the cell with a recorder and notebook. Frank sat on the cot, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow but clear. The man looked like someone who had been fighting shadows for too long. "Frank," Nathan began, setting the recorder down, "you said last night you were at the factory during the explosion. Tell me everything." Frank swallowed hard, his voice rasping from disuse. "It was a welding job on the lower deck. The gas line was cracked. We all knew it. I filed reports, but management ignored them. That night, your partner, Officer Reynolds, came in for an inspection. He was a good man. Said he'd report it if we didn't shut down operations." Nathan clenched his jaw. Reynolds' face flickered in his mind. The easy grin, the smell of motor oil and cigarettes, the promise they had made to retire together after 20 years. Frank continued, voice trembling. "They forced me to keep working. When the pipe burst, it was seconds. Everything went white. I woke up outside. I thought Reynolds was behind me, but..." His breath hitched. "I saw the fire. I panicked. I ran. I've been running ever since. Nathan leaned back, watching him closely. Why come here now? Frank looked up, his eyes glistening. Because I heard about you, the officer who still visits the memorial every year. I thought, if anyone deserved to hear the truth, it was you. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Nathan studied the man, the wrinkles carved deep by guilt, the raw sincerity trembling in his words. He wanted to hate him. He wanted to shout, to condemn, to demand why. But all he felt was tired. Finally, he said quietly, "You should have stayed that night." Frank nodded, tears spilling. "I know. I've lived every day wishing I had." Nathan stood, ending the recording. The truth doesn't erase what happened, but it matters. As he turned to leave, Frank called after him. "Do you believe a man like me deserves forgiveness?" Nathan paused, his hand on the door. "Forgiveness isn't something you deserve," he said. "It's something someone decides to give. I haven't decided yet." Outside, Lydia waited by the hallway with Hazel, who held Rex's leash. The dog wagged his tail as Nathan approached, his amber eyes reflecting trust. Hazel looked up at him. "Did he tell the truth?" "Yes," Nathan said after a moment. "And it's not the kind that makes you feel better." Hazel reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his glove. "Mom used to say truth hurts before it heals." Nathan smiled faintly. She was a smart woman. By noon, the internal affairs vehicle arrived. A black SUV with tinted windows. 2 officers stepped out. Captain Leary, a tall, stern woman in her 40s with sharp cheekbones and the posture of someone who'd never allowed herself to bend, and her junior partner, Agent Morris, a younger man with tired eyes and a soft-spoken demeanor. Leary introduced herself briskly. "Officer Cole, we'll take it from here." Nathan handed over the file. He confessed, voluntarily. "Good," Leary said. "You'll be commended for your handling of this." He looked her in the eye. "I didn't do it for commendations." Leary hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Understood." Hazel and Rex watched from the hallway as Frank was escorted out in handcuffs. Before stepping into the vehicle, he turned and met Nathan's gaze. For a moment, there was no anger, only quiet acknowledgement between 2 men, bound by the same tragedy in different ways. After the car disappeared down the snowy road, Hazel tugged on Nathan's coat. "Is he going to jail forever?" "No," Nathan said softly, "but he's going somewhere he can't run anymore." That evening, the station grew still again. Duffy left early, muttering something about frozen pipes, and Stevens dozed off in the corner chair. Hazel sat by the heater with Rex, drawing once more. Nathan stood by the window, watching snow fall under the streetlight. Lydia walked up beside him, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "You did the right thing," she said. "I don't know if it feels that way." "It will," Lydia said quietly. "Sometimes the right thing doesn't heal us right away. It just makes room for the healing to start." He turned toward her. "You always this wise?" She smiled. "Only after too many night shifts." Hazel's laughter echoed faintly behind them, as Rex barked softly, his tail thumping against the rug. Nathan looked back at them, the girl, the dog, the quiet glow of the heater, and felt something shift again inside him. The ache was still there, but it wasn't hollow anymore. As the night deepened, Nathan sat beside Hazel and Rex. "You know," he said softly, "I think Sarah was right." "About what?" Hazel asked, tilting her head. "That sometimes saving one person is enough?" Hazel smiled sleepily, resting her head against Rex's back. "Then you saved 2. Nathan glanced at Lydia across the room, her face lit softly by the lamplight. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe her. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle, forgiving, endless. Winter loosened its grip on Cedar Hollow. The air still held the faint chill of snow, but the sun had begun to linger longer in the sky, gilding the streets in soft amber light. The police station, once a place of echoes and ghosts, now hummed with quiet life. Plants sat on the window ledges. The heater clicked steadily, and in the corner, a small bulletin board had been decorated with Hazel's drawings, crude but full of heart. There was one of Rex chasing snowflakes, one of Lydia handing out soup, and one that made Nathan pause every time he saw it. a tall man in uniform holding the hand of a little girl, a golden light glowing between them. Officer Nathan Cole stood by that board one early morning, coffee in hand, gazing at the drawings. He hadn't slept much, not because of nightmares, but because peace still felt foreign, like wearing a new coat that hadn't quite molded to his shape. Rex, now clean and well-fed, rested nearby, his fur gleaming with health, his amber eyes half-closed in contentment. The German shepherd had grown visibly softer in his watchfulness, though his devotion hadn't dimmed. Behind Nathan, the door creaked open, and Sergeant Duffy shuffled in, his thick frame wrapped in a flannel jacket. "You're here early," he grumbled, rubbing his hands together. "Most folks wait for the sun to at least show up before starting their shift." Nathan smirked. "You just don't like mornings." "Never did, never will," Duffy muttered, pouring himself a cup of coffee. His gaze drifted to the drawings. "Kid's got talent. Reminds me why this job's worth the headache." Nathan nodded. "She's stronger than she looks." "Yeah, well," Duffy said, taking a sip. "So are you." He started for his office, pausing at the door. "You ever think about what's next for her?" Nathan hesitated. "Every day." It was true. Hazel had been with them for nearly 2 months now. The social worker had offered to place her in a foster program, but the girl had clung to Rex's collar and refused to speak for hours after hearing the news. Lydia had stayed late that evening, sitting beside Hazel until she fell asleep. Nathan had watched from the hallway, something deep inside him twisting painfully. He had promised himself he wouldn't take on more pain, but promises had a way of breaking when hearts began to heal. Later that day, Lydia arrived at the station, her usual warmth filling the room. Her auburn hair glinted in the sunlight, and her coat carried the faint scent of cinnamon. "A gift from Martha's bakery," she explained with a smile. "Morning, officers," she greeted cheerfully. "I brought breakfast. Don't tell Duffy it's low-sugar muffins." Duffy, from his office, shouted, "I heard that!" Hazel giggled from the break room, where she was helping Officer Stevens clean the coffee machine, though most of her helping involved spilling sugar everywhere. Stevens, who was now something of her self-declared uncle, groaned dramatically. "She's a menace, Cole. I demand hazard pay." Hazel flashed a mischievous grin. "You said I could stir." Rex barked once, tail wagging, clearly siding with the child. The laughter filled the station like sunlight. For a moment, Nathan just stood there, watching them all. Lydia smiling softly, Duffy pretending not to laugh, Stevens sputtering in mock defeat, and Hazel glowing brighter than the winter light outside. By noon, Nathan drove Hazel to the town library, an old brick building that smelled of wood polish and stories. He had arranged for her to attend reading sessions hosted by Mrs. Porter, a retired schoolteacher known for her strict bun and gentle soul. Mrs. Porter was in her 70s, with silver hair always perfectly coiled, glasses perched on her nose, and the kind of voice that could make a child sit still with wonder. "Officer Cole," she greeted with a firm handshake. "This must be the young lady you told me about?" Hazel nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Porter's stern expression softened. "Well, Hazel, we've got adventure books, fairy tales, and a whole shelf of dog stories. Think you can handle that?" Hazel smiled shyly. "I think I can." Nathan watched her settle among the children, Rex lying quietly at her feet, like a guardian carved from loyalty itself. When she began to read aloud, voice uncertain but growing steadier, he felt something deep in his chest shift again. He didn't recognize it at first, but it felt like pride. When they left the library later that afternoon, Hazel chattered non-stop about the stories she'd read. Nathan listened, his lips curved in a quiet smile. "You're going to make that teacher proud," he said. Hazel looked up at him, serious for a moment. "Do you think my mom would be proud too?" Nathan's throat tightened. He took a deep breath before answering. "I think she already is." That night, Lydia joined them for dinner at the small diner near the station, the same place where Nathan and Sarah had once spent their quiet Friday evenings. The neon sign flickered above the door, and the smell of grilled food mingled with the sound of laughter and clinking cups. The waitress, Norma, a plump woman in her 50s with curly blonde hair and a habit of calling everyone sweetheart, brought them steaming bowls of chicken stew. "On the house for the heroes," she said with a wink. "Heard about that factory case. You did good, Officer Cole." Nathan smiled politely but said nothing. Lydia filled the silence with gentle conversation, asking Hazel about her day. The girl talked animatedly about Mrs. Porter and the other kids, her eyes bright. When the meal was done, Norma placed a small slice of pie in front of Hazel. "Special order from Martha," she said. "She told me to tell you, keep smiling, Snowbird." Hazel beamed, and the warmth of it spread across the table. As they stepped outside, the evening sky blushed in shades of lavender and gold. Hazel slipped her hand into Nathan's. "Can I stay with you and Rex forever?" Nathan stopped, his heart caught between ache and joy. He looked down at her hopeful face, then toward Lydia, who was watching quietly, her eyes glistening. "We'll make it official," he said softly. "If that's what you want." Hazel threw her arms around him, and Rex barked happily, circling them both as snowflakes began to fall again, gentle, fleeting, like blessings from a sky that had finally forgiven. Weeks later, the adoption papers were signed. The day was clear and cold, the courthouse steps gleaming under the late winter sun. Duffy and Stevens were there, both pretending not to cry. Lydia stood beside Nathan, her hand brushing his briefly. A silent promise that this wasn't the end of healing, only the beginning of something whole. When the judge announced it official, Hazel squealed with joy. Nathan knelt beside her, eyes shining. "Welcome home, Hazel Cole," he whispered. Outside, Rex leapt through the snow, his tail slicing arcs in the air. The town around them seemed brighter somehow, as though every window carried a flicker of their newfound warmth. That night, back at the station turned home, Nathan lit a single candle beside Sarah's framed photo. The letter she had written still rested in his pocket, folded neatly, the words etched into his heart. "You were right," he murmured. "She needed me. But I needed her more." Hazel came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Good night, Dad," she whispered, the first time she'd ever said it. Nathan closed his eyes, letting the words settle over him like the softest snowfall. "Good night, sweetheart." Rex barked once, as if sealing the moment, and lay down beside them. The candle's flame flickered, casting a warm glow across the room. Outside, the last of the winter snow began to melt, revealing the earth beneath. A quiet reminder that even the coldest seasons end, and some lights once lit never go out. In the end, this story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder or light from the heavens. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a hungry child, a loyal dog, or a weary officer who chooses kindness instead of indifference. It is through small acts of mercy that God reveals his greatest works. When we open our hearts to help those in need, we become the very hands through which he touches the world. So, as you finish this story, take a moment to look around your own life. Maybe there is someone near you who needs hope, a word of comfort, or a helping hand. Be that light, be that miracle. If this story moved your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that goodness still exists. Leave a comment below, tell us what you felt, and if you believe in the miracles of God, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and everyone watching, filling your days with love, peace, and kindness. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, compassion, and the quiet miracles that walk among us every day.